Welcome to the weekend, and welcome to Weekend Watches. Rise and shine, folks. I hope your weekend has been spectacular thus far. We begin the day with watches that are all for sale, with names, references, and prices, especially the prices, listed just below the video. Also, we have a new direct inquiry line for questions about buying these watches. Email tmosso at thewatchbox.com for complete availability, condition, boxes, papers, accessories, and pricing, accommodations, and detailing on every watch you see right here. Let's jump straight in with a pair of Patek Philippe, including one that I think is underrated, quite frankly. We don't talk enough about the 5905, and the 5905P001 right here is a sensational watch. It packs an awful lot into its 42mm platinum case. Though large by Patek standards, it is feature dense. Now you can see, starting from the side, the watch is a bit unusual. With that scalloped lug profile, it's got a little bit of Moser in it. And then you can see that the bezel itself is concave in profile to diminish the visual mass. Now what I appreciate here is the simplicity of the dial and the fact that a sector dial has been achieved using metallic elements. So you have metal chapter rings inboard segmented by applique faceted and high polished white gold individual hour indices. So you have a metal chapter ring style layout for a sector dial that is composed entirely of polished metal components. Now the watch is loomed. It's also an annual calendar with the day, the date, and the month. You adjust the annual calendar laterally. It features not just a chronograph, but a flyback chronograph that you reset and restart with a single push of the reset trigger. Now we'll move the hands out of the way, but one of my favorite features of this watch is the fact that you get a 60-minute chronograph register. So instead of the usual 30 minutes on a standard chrono, you get 60 here, which is more intuitive and more useful. There is a little AM/PM indicator right there, so you know when the danger zone is. That is when it is night, when you should not use the manual adjusters for the calendar. The annual calendar need be adjusted only once per year during the jump from February to March. And of course, the timepiece powered by the vertical clutch column wheel, caliber 28-520, about 55-hour power reserve, automatic winding, silicone hairspring, free sprung, 6-position adjustment, very accurate, per Patek, -3 + 2 seconds per day. Now throwing it on the wrist first, let's note that this being a platinum Patek Philippe, you do have that brilliant cut top Vesselton diamond between the lugs at 6 o'clock to remind you. Throw it on the wrist, it's a spectacular piece, an all-around sporty watch, not quite a sports watch, but a sporty watch. It has a full figure on the wrist without being ungainly or inelegant in any respect, and you can see how it does have a nice ramped flank to allow it to sit easily underneath the dress cuff. But if you want a thinner Patek Philippe watch and you want to stick with a complex calendar, trading an annual with a chronograph for a pure bred Perpetual, we have this 5140P001. Same combination of diamonds and platinum, but because you have a corrector between the lugs at 6, this diamond is up at 12. The same blue metallic sunburst dial, albeit here with perpetual calendar. Mono counters for the day and the 24-hour danger zone AM/PM cycle. You have at 3 o'clock the month and the leap year phase. We're entering 4 now, so I need to adjust that. And then you can see the radial date as well as the moon phase, which has an adjustment interval, the moon phase that is, of 122 years. Now the case is elegant and compact, under 10 millimeters thick and delightfully 37.2 millimeters in diameter, an easy watch to wear. I appreciate the details such as the recessed crown that sits almost flush with the case band, and when you turn it over you have Patek micro rotor caliber 240Q beaten away at 21.6 48-hour power reserve. You can see because of the micro rotor the case can be very thin. Also because of the micro rotor you get the broad visible display case back of a manual, but with the convenience of automatic winding. Patek Philippe seal, this one too is extremely accurate. Per the Patek Philippe seal standards, you're talking about watches that will run to -3 + 2 seconds per day, and in this particular set of dimensions, wears wonderfully compact on the wrist. We talked about the 5905 not being terribly thick. Well, this is quite slim. I would even say ultra thin for an automatic winding perpetual calendar. It sits gracefully, and as you can see on my 16-centimeter circumference wrist, low and compact from side to side. Plenty of clearance on either side to wear this watch on a smaller wrist, or even consider it a viable unisex option if you are a lady collector who prefers men's watches. Now, speaking briefly about the other grand name of Geneva, we're going down market a little bit, but losing no prestige by jumping over to Rolex, and I have 3 colorful Rolex watches on the table today, starting with the Rolex LV, Lunette Vert. Actually, that's a bit of a misnomer because the whole dial, Cadran et Lunette both vert, or green. The green dial, initially described as green gold when this watch launched. I believe that was later downplayed to make it more acceptable as an option in Islamic markets. It's the same original composition with a glittering luster that does look somewhere between green galvanized base metal and gold itself. Now you have a Serichrome green ceramic insert, the first green ceramic insert by Rolex for the Submariner, and of course, unlike the 2003 50th anniversary watch, which was a black dial and a green bezel, here were double green, giving this watch the nickname Hulk. White gold hands, white gold indices, and I should say the bezel sounds as good as it feels. Let's have a listen here. It's a fine but crisp and precise 120 click unidirectional. Now 300 meters water resistant, 40 millimeters in 904L stainless steel. Rolex boasts that you do not need to rinse this steel after exposure to chlorine or ocean seawater. Inside the case, caliber 3135, 48-hour power reserve, chronometer certified. And this model, originally launched back in 2010, has arguably never been hotter than it is right now. Now you have a glide lock system internal to the clasp. You can see the watch featuring that 20 millimeters of adjustment in 2mm increments. This is useful because unlike many dive extensions, which are all or nothing, you can use this one for precise sizing. So if you want to add, subtract 2, 4, 6 millimeters, you can do that quite easily. So it is both a sizing mechanism for quick adjustment as well as a fold-out extension for dive suits or thick winter coats. Throw it on the wrist. It does wear larger than the old 40s, but I find that if you can wear the old 40mm 5-digit Submariner, you can wear the 6-digit. This is 116610 for those of you keeping score. 300 meters, a chronometer, stainless steel, 40 millimeters, best known as the Hulk, but I just like to think of it as the successor to the original anniversary sub, flying the flag for Rolex's most famous model, and a glorious combination of silver and white gold and green. I should mention the bezel, which is highly resistant ceramic, highly scratch resistant, but everything that is silver internal to the bezel, the indices and the numerals, those are platinum deposits. A lovely piece. Now let's talk about a GMT that bowed last year. Frankly, I think a lot of folks were taken aback by the arrival of the first ever red gold GMT-Master. First, because it was a completely different look, and, well, it's a bit striking. There's no doubt, with that combination of the root beer bezel and the red gold case and bracelet, this is a watch that certainly makes a statement the way something like a Royal Oak Offshore would. It's glam rock at its best, but it's hard to believe this was also the first ever full red gold Rolex GMT. A fact. So this watch, like the original BLNR blue and black, is a flag that flies forever, regardless of what comes after. This was the first. Bidirectional rotating Serichrome bezel. Now Rolex has used a red gold deposit to create the numerals and the indices. You have ceramic in both a sort of Georgia clay red and black, and then of course you have a very subtle set of red gold indices and hands, and then you have that red gold gilt style print GMT-Master 2. Now this is the 126715, and 126, for those of you Rolex mavens out there, you know what that means. You know it means a new generation 3-day power reserve, courtesy of a larger mainspring barrel inside a thin, or I should say a larger mainspring inside a thinned out barrel, a revised train, and then the Leica etched Chronergy escapement, giving you that bump from 48 to 70 hours of power reserve. 100 meters water resistant and brightly loomed. This is an all-around sports watch, not just an aviator's timepiece. It is a true dual time, that's still a fact, but if you want to set that 24-hour hand to Greenwich Mean Time, you can see it right there. You can actually use the local GMT offset of your port or airport of destination to find a third time zone. That's what you get from a GMT-Master 2. A timepiece that looks great, feels great, and wears well, even on a smaller wrist. You can see it's a little bit different internally than the sub, as it features, we can check internally right there, it features the 5mm Easy Link extension system, but not glide lock. Still very substantial. Solid link milled clasp, solid end link, a red gold, full gold Rolex on a bracelet. Feels like any other brand's platinum watch. That's how solid they are. Now this is my favorite Rolex, not just of our time, but of all time, the Milgauss GV. Now this is 116400 GV Z Blue. So you have that original green crystal that arrived with the current generation Milgauss in 2007, but for 2014, Rolex added this explosive, iridescent, almost electric blue dial, which fits a watch that is heavily inspired by high-powered professional electronics. And I'm not talking about your PlayStation 4 Pro. I'm talking about particle accelerators. I'm talking about laboratory conditions, incredibly large electromagnets and static magnets, and that was the goal of the original Milgauss, be able to operate in proximity to such devices. Now here's the thing, Milgauss is almost certainly an understatement, as the watch features a soft iron inner cage to help channel some field lines around the escapement, but it also features a non-magnetic escapement as well as a niobium zirconium hairspring. And remember, back in the 80s, the IWC 500,000 ampere per meter, remember, Milgauss is 80,000 ampere per meter, but IWC's 500,000 ampere per meter minimum anti-magnetic ingenieur used a niobium zirconium hairspring. So that hairspring, in combination with this escapement and the soft iron cage, leads me to believe that Milgauss is not just an understatement, but perhaps only a fraction of the watch's true anti-magnetism. I'm going to test one of these with an MRI soon and answer the question definitively. You have the lightning bolt hand, which dates back to the original Milgauss, the 6541 and 6543 of the 50s, back when they were stolid and sober. They actually introduced that feature, so it's not just a piece of postmodern whimsy. You also have the orange Arabic numerals and hash marks outboard of the white gold applique indices and the Milgauss script. Throw it on the wrist, it's an elegant watch. For a 40mm sporting Rolex, still 100 meters water resistant, it wears more like a dress watch, as the 40mm case features a relatively compact span across the wrist, about 50mm, but the unique thing about the Air King and the Milgauss, they're basically body doubles, is that their solid end links don't really protrude past the lugs, meaning they pretty much wear true to their lug-to-lug dimension. So though 50mm lug-to-lug, it's more than a Daytona, it's more than a Sub, it's more than a GMT, it actually wears a bit more compact than those. And you can see it's a nice flat watch with no rotating bezel. It slides easily underneath the cuff. This will be my first Rolex, no doubt. I don't know if this one on my wrist will be. You're probably going to get to it before I do, but what a watch. Also a chronometer, also 100 meters water resistant. It also has Easy Link in the clasp. A lovely piece, easily my favorite Rolex. Now, if we could shift gears for a moment and talk about something that's a little bit off the beaten path. We love independence here on the show, and we love independence here at Watchbox, and Maitres du Temps is no exception. Founded in the 2000s by American watch executive Stephen Holtzman, Maitres du Temps is exactly what the name implies, masters of time who come together a bit like the Harry Winston Opus series or MB&F to create watches, and they created 3 series, the Chapter 1, Chapter 2, and Chapter 3. The Chapter 3 bowed in late 2011, and what I have here is a custom piece-unique Chapter 3. You can see on the flank, one of one with a hand-painted dial by Laloque-based artisan Andre Martinez. So this is a one-of-one micro-painted dial. You can see the recursive images of the American flags, and the watch has been pared down without the moon phase, small seconds, or dates of the standard watch. What we have here is a combination of the hours, the minutes, and then a small whimsical sub-register that rotates to show you an American star on a blue base, and then on a red and white background the signature of the artist. So it's there for no other reason but your enjoyment. Now this is a dual time watch. You can see the fired blue hands, an exceptional and original form. By the way, if you're wondering who was involved in this, it was Andreas Streller, who performed the production engineering, and Kari Voutilainen, who conducted much of the design, as well as dedicated himself to dictating the style and the finishing of the SCH-03 manual wind movement. Now, it is a double time watch or a dual time watch. Let me show you how this works. There are shutters that not only cover the second time zone, but actually adjust so that they are flush with the dial. When they retract, they first retract in before they retract away, and you'll see the same thing when they return. You could see that they become flush with the dial. Retract them one more time, you could see they pull themselves down before pull themselves away. Now what happens here is you have 2 hand-painted barrels, which are a style signature of Maitres du Temps, and what happens, as I adjust the time, you could see that there is an AM-PM night-day barrel up at 12, and then there is a 12-hour barrel in American red, white, and blue down at 6 o'clock. What happens after 12 hours, because it has a 24-hour format for that second time zone, as you adjust from day to night, the 12-hour barrel jumps to a backup 12-hour barrel. So you can see how that works, jumping back and forth. And then as we move towards day, you could see the barrel up at the top. I might have actually had it on day just before. Now you're looking at the moon. But you can see the barrel up at the top gives you your AM, PM. It's got a little man in the moon. And then you have the twin 12-hour barrels down at 6 o'clock that give you your hour for the second time zone. Now you might be asking, how do I set this thing independently? Let's say I just want to set one of the time zones separate from the other. Well, what you do is you disable, pardon me, you have to affirmatively disable it. These things require a little bit of elbow grease. So having firmly pressed on the disabler, I have now stopped the second time zone, and you can see how I'm adjusting the local time at center without changing the time at 6. All of that done, I simply retract it, re-engage. 42 millimeters in white gold. It's an easy watch to wear, and you can see the Voudelaine and pedigree in the style of the case. It's a good-looking watch, and it's easily the most wearable of the Maitres du Temps timepieces. So if you want an Andreas Streller and a Carry Voudelaine, but you don't want the one everyone else has, hell, if you want a Maitres du Temps Chapter 3 and you don't want the one everyone else has, this piece unique is exactly what the doctor ordered. And a lovely patriotic flourish to bring out on your American holidays. Sticking with our independence theme, we're going to talk a little bit about a brand that is near and dear to my heart and my wrist, Sinn Spezialen of Frankfurt, a timepiece from their studios. The Sinn 140, also known as the Space Chronograph, so named because it has traveled into space with German astronauts. Now, the timepiece is difficult to describe in conventional sizing terms. What you need to know is that it's 44 millimeters wide, but only about 45 millimeters from lug to lug, so it wears easily, and at 15.4 millimeters thick, it's thinner than you think. The case is a very 70s-inspired tonneau, and you can see that it is a blasted finish because it uses Sinn's Tegament treatment. Now, my watch also uses Tegament. You might be wondering, what does that mean? Well, you can see the blasted finish with a little bit of a yellow tone to it is a carbon-diffused, face-hardened steel, and the carbon penetrates deep. So it's not just a micrometer on the top. It actually projects quite deep into the watch's metal, making it effectively as hard as ceramic on its outer face, but unlike ceramic, it can't be fractured or chipped. Now, you have a small copper sulfate capsule in the flank of the watch, replaceable, and then the watch itself is filled with nitrogen to displace any moisture. Any moisture that gets in is pulled out by the copper sulfate insert, so it can actively dehumidify itself internally. Now, if you want to time something concurrent with the chronograph, you have an internal ratcheting bezel, bidirectional. Now you can quickly line up that index with the minute hand, and you can see how I have a 60-minute count-up timer, 5, 10, 15, 20. I also have a central register like a Lemania 5100 or a Lemania 1040 caliber in Omega speak, a Lemania 1340 in Lemania speak. I have that 60-minute chronograph, and that's because Sinn uses its own quasi-in-house SZ01. It is a top-grade Valjoux 7750 that has been modified to have a central instant jumping minutes register that goes up to 60 instead of the Valjoux's standard 30-minute sub-register. So you just saw the instant jump, and it is a 60-minute radial display. So you have both a 60-minute bezel, a 60-minute register, you still have the 12-hour register, you have constant seconds, you have a red varnished seconds hand for the chronograph, and then you have a date. Now, the watch features a little bit of a nod to its European and prior to European, its shuttle-borne space pedigree, because it did fly with German astronauts on the shuttle before that was retired. It's 100 meters water-resistant, which is unusual for an aerospace watch, as most pilots' watches and astronauts' watches are designed to deal with vacuums, extreme heat, and cold, but not necessarily water. So you can swim with this watch, provided you put it on a water-resistant band. And at 45 millimeters lug to lug, you can really see how this watch has plenty of clearance on both sides of my wrist, though it's a broad watch. It's not a long watch. It's a really easy watch to wear, and as you can see, very, very, very comfortable. It's not even super chunky, and it'll fit underneath the jacket cuff. Sinn goes all out with a brogued leather strap, so you have leather stitched on top of leather with a lovely contrasting white aviator stitch. Handsome and substantial. It feels like it'll last forever, and it's matched to a fixed strap minder, which is held in place by a red contrasting binder, so it can't move around unwanted. It's always there for easy access, and then there is a tegmented matching stainless steel buckle, also face hardened. Okay, from one German-speaking watchmaker to another, we are going from Frankfurt to Glashütte and a Lange Sohne. Now, this is a timepiece that's pretty close to the perfect three-hand dress watch. While I still love the Richard Lange Pour le Mérite, this is a little bit more elemental and even thinner. Now, this is the 38.5 millimeter 1815. Small seconds, 3 hands, alpha-style hands, fired blue steel. The dial itself is made of sterling silver. It is then galvanized, this silver tone that you see with transferred Arabic numerals, and then there's the chaptering outboard. Now, the watch is nice and slim, courtesy of Lange manufactured caliber L0511. Manual wind, 55-hour power reserve. You can see some of the trademarks of Lange finish, such as the German silver nickel copper zinc alloy used for the bridges and plates. It's the copper that gives it that golden tone. You can see that there's a 3/4 style bridge with pivot jewels set in screw-fixed chaton, just as you would have found on a 19th century or early 20th century Lange pocket watch. Black polished swan's neck regulator, black polished cover for the escape wheel, and then you have mirrored anglage on the edge of every bridge, plus a freehand engraved balance cock or half bridge. You can see it beats away at 21.6, and you'll also appreciate that for precise setting it does include stop seconds or hacking. It features both black polished screws and fired blue screws, each one in turn giving the watch a different tonal character on its caseback. There's a lot of color on the caseback: the violet of pivot jewels, the blue of screws, the silver of black polish, and the gold tones of the German silver bridges. It's gorgeous on the wrist. It's low on the wrist. It's a handsome dress watch and a nice all-arounder that wears well on almost any wrist size. Again, my wrist right here is 16 centimeters circumference, a real sharp match for that watch. So let's go to the more accessible end of the spectrum for a little bit and talk vintage. We don't have a whole lot of vintage on the show because vintage is probably less than maybe 3% of our business overall, but when I have an interesting piece with broad appeal, I like to bring it on. This is a circa 1966-1967 Omega Seamaster 300. This is the 165024. It's a model that bowed back in 1963, and the reason I say that this one's probably a 66-67, the specific features of this bezel, as well as the fact that the bracelet, which is original to the watch, is stamped 4th quarter 1966. In case you're wondering, the bracelet is a 1506 with 16 end links. The watch is surprisingly beefy by vintage standards. At 42 millimeters, it's the same size as a Moonwatch Professional or a Pre-Moon Professional. At 42 millimeters in stainless steel, this watch wears easily and contemporary on the wrist. Back in the day, they were rated to 200 but tested to 300. I wouldn't test either limit today, as a vintage dive watch, like an old ship, needs to find a safe harbor. This is a great watch to wear all around except for when you're diving, and that's simply the rule of vintage dive watches. It's powered by Omega's manufacturer caliber 552, 24 jewels, automatic winding, 50-hour power reserve, a vintagey 19.8 beat rate. And here you can really see some of the character of the watch. The large crown, the beveled lugs, the lyre-style case, the minimal thickness and cross-section of the folded links of that bracelet. You can also see that the bezel itself is gloriously capped with acrylic, giving it a glossy gleam that matches the plexiglass of the dial. You can see the Omega logo at the center of the plexiglass, and that's your signature of a genuine Omega factory plexiglass crystal. But then you have that same thermoplastic on top of the tritium base bezel. So you can see how the tritium is aged on both the bezel, under the acrylic, as well as on the dial itself, which is pretty much antiseptic. It's not so perfect that you have suspicions, but you can see that it's nice and even patina. This is the real deal, not fauxtina, and the hands nicely match the dial. The two things more or less aging symmetrically. Lovely open 6, open 9 quarter Arabics, and a matte dial base that, being black, hides no marks of tarnish or handling. Is it perfect? No. Is it awesome? Yes. It's a very good survivor. I wouldn't consider this to be a vintage beater. As you can see, we did not polish the watch. That's not our way. Not with something that contains this much original historic fabric. It's only factory once, as they say. And of course, you can see on the case back some of the original markings of factory manufacture, scratched from years of use, but still deep and clear. Just a handsome watch, one of the best vintage divers you can pick up. I would take that over a 5513, 5512 from that era any day of the week. Now, if you want something a little bit more unique, let's consider the soccer watch. This is the Omega Seamaster Soccer Chronograph, reference 145016, made in the early 1970s. It's powered by the Moonwatch caliber 851, so manual wind with the caliber 851. It has a 70s style tonneau shape, and you can see just how much it has in common aesthetically with the Sinn 140 we showed before. As with the Seamaster 300, we have declined to perform any refinishing of this case because the character line remain so crisp and well defined, the metal so full, and the case so even and symmetrical end to end and side to side that we're simply not going to do anything here to adulterate that. It's on a 116 bracelet with 342 end links, and as you can see, the dial is the soccer or football dial. Why? Because the 30-minute register has been extensively printed so that there's a superimposed 45-minute scale outboard of the primary 30-minute scale, and that's useful for timing your halves in a football match. Now, you can also see the cool color scheme of this dial, featuring a combination of faded tritium lume in a sort of ecru coloration, light blues and dark blues, white, red, and black with silver, all of that on a handsome and unusual tonneau-shaped watch that is redolent of its era, and you can see just how dramatically domed that plexiglass is and how much off-axis distortion you get from it. Once again, a Moonwatch caliber in there, 17 joules, manual wind, 48-hour power reserve, 21.6 beat rate, cam lateral clutch. The same movement that was flying with NASA during the 70s powers this watch. It's an easy watch to wear, stainless steel at about 38 millimeters. I wouldn't say it wears like a 38. It does seem a little bit larger on the wrist. I'd say it looks more like a 40, but because it's so narrow across the wrist, the way these tonneau cases tend to be, you could wear it on a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference with no problem whatsoever. So a good-looking and unusual watch. Everyone's got a Moonwatch. Not everyone has a soccer chronograph. A really good-looking 1970s Omega Survivor, and one of the few vintage pieces that I have found fetching enough to bring on the show. Now, jumping from Biel-Bienne, the home city of Omega, to the Vallée du Jeu, and Le Sentier, Jaeger-LeCoultre, launching back in 2005 its first AMVOX watches. The contract for co-branding between Aston Martin and JLC was signed back in 2004, and the 10-year contract spanned 4 to 14. Well, this was the first series of AMVOX watches, and the model you see right here was known as the AMVOX 1 R Alarm. Well, the standard AMVOX 1 was a Polaris 68 inspired 42 millimeters in several different metals. The AMVOX R Alarm was made in titanium with a British Racing green dial and platinum. This model right here with the black yellow accented dial. Now, it is a 44 millimeter case compared to the 42 of the standard watch, and you can see individually numbered. It's part of a series of 150 pieces. You can see the bolt-fixed plaque in matching platinum on the side, and you can really see how much of the case design, right down to the beveling of the lugs and the triple crowns, was drawn from the design of the Polaris 68. Remember, back in 2005 when this watch came out, the tribute to Polaris was still 4 years away. So this was truly the first modern tribute to Polaris. Now, the fun thing about it is it's really a multi-purpose watch, not truly a dive watch. At 50 meters water resistant, it still features the Polaris's internal rotating bezel, so you can use that as a timing organ by lining up with the Calypso style hand. That is the JLC term, the Calypso style minute hand. So you got your 60-minute timer, and you also have your alarm, and the alarm is controlled using the crown up at 2 o'clock. It has a deep and throaty roar. If you look at the case back, you can see that there is a hollow case back that allows it to resonate in a more pronounced fashion. Aston Martin being anything but a shotgun co-branding marriage with JLC, as Jaeger gauges were used from the 1920s through the 1990s on Aston Martin cars. Now, when you fire this one up, you can really hear it. Caliber 918 in this watch has plenty of volume. It'll go far longer than that, but I didn't want to have to stop it. As you can hear, it is very loud. With the date, automatic winding, internal rotating bezel, and an alarm, this is a lovely piece that wears easily and comfortably, even on a small wrist. The case size is exactly the same as the AMVOX 2, which I wore happily for years. So this is one of the few 44s you're going to find that wears well on a small wrist. It's less than 50 millimeters lug to lug, and as you can see, in spite of the many overlapping features, the watch sits real low on the wrist. Now, if you get super close to the case, you can see from the side, not only did they take the look of the Polaris in crown, dial, and lugs, but they also spec'd a box section sapphire on this watch designed to directly evoke the plexiglass of the original super compressor case Polaris diving alarm. So everything about this watch, studied and deliberate, uniting two different eras and one of my favorite modern Jaeger-LeCoultre watches. And of course, being an AMVOX alarm, it is a Memovox, which is one of the core JLC model lines. If you want to get a JLC that is core collection, like your Moonwatch from Omega or your Submariner from Rolex or your Calatrava or Nautilus from Patek, you want to get a Memovox JLC or you want to get yourself some sort of complex calendar or reverso. That watch checks one of the most important boxes. Okay, but let's say you want something that's a bit more water resistant. You still want a high horology sports watch, but 44 is a bit much, and, well, frankly, you need something that's swimmable. And the Vacheron Constantin Overseas Generation 2 definitely is. Now, this is a 2015 limited edition of 350 pieces. This was really the last ride for the Generation 2 Overseas Chrono, which would be replaced only a year later at SIHH. So what you've got right here is a stainless steel 42mm case with a dial that's a combination of silver satin, a little bit like a DeLorean, and then you also have red highlights for the chronograph seconds, minutes, and hours hands. Then you have these red Arabic numerals outboard for reading minutes and seconds. You can see it's an instantaneous jumping minute. It uses the Frederic Piguet 1185 here, doing business as the Vacheron Constantin caliber 1137, but they had their own modular double date design, which was lost in the Generation 3 Chrono. A lot of people still mourn the loss of this distinctive complication. Another feature that I loved on this generation of the watch was the asymmetry, as the chronograph minutes register was made far larger than it's ordinarily featured on a chronograph, since it's more pertinent than, for example, chronograph hours, which is relatively easy to adjust, relatively easy to read, and then also rarely used, as we rarely time intervals of hours with our chronographs. They made the minutes register bigger. Now, the case is cushion-shaped, a little bit like the 1977 Vacheron 222 sports watch designed by Jörg Heisek. The Overseas descended from a design by Vincent Kaufmann and Dino Modolo, two designers from the 1990s, one of whom, Kaufmann, later became the in-house design chief for Vacheron, and that's where this style comes from, a combination of Heisek's original, Modolo's 1990s design, and Kaufmann's evolutions that debuted in the 2004 Generation 2. Now, on the case back, you can see it is solid. The image of the Italian naval training vessel, Amerigo Vespucci, and, of course, it is a gorgeous full-rigged ship. Solid case back because there's a solid iron cage around the movement, just like you would find on the Milgauss, to make this 150-meter water-resistant watch also highly anti-magnetic. Vertical clutch column wheel, automatic winding chronograph caliber adjusted in 5 positions. The Frederic Piguet movement, though it's not visible, is very nicely hand-finished. So nothing is lacking right there, and a relatively rare and desirable version of the Generation 2 Overseas Chrono. Now, if you want something a little bit larger, and you can't bear to scratch your hand-finished Swiss watch, how about something that's finished with diamond-tipped milling tools and essentially eternal? If you're not the type to fracture or chip a sapphire crystal, you're probably never going to put a mark on a full ceramic watch, and that's what the Dark Side of the Moon is. The Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch Dark Side of the Moon, 44.25 millimeters in ceramic. It doesn't wear that size. Ceramic is super light, and the watch is only about 50 millimeters lug to lug. It bowed at Baselworld 2013, and it's become a modern classic. One of the watches that people associate with modern-day Omega, and probably one of the milestone watches of the dearly departed 2010s. Now, this one is equipped a little bit unusually. As you can see, the dial is red accented, which plays well against this optional NATO-style strap. Now, this is a factory Omega NATO strap, so you can see this is not some sort of aftermarket edition. This one comes straight from Omega, which means it wears well, it wears easy, and because Omega wants to make this as user-friendly as possible, it doesn't use the swan's neck choke ring sizing system of a conventional NATO. This one uses a standard pin buckle, so you can easily and quickly size it on your wrist. Now, the movement here really is super cool, so I'm going to take a quick moment and see if I can pull this strap and expose the case back for you, because it is neat to look at. And the caliber 9300 was a milestone movement for Omega. 60-hour power reserve, coaxial and a chronometer with twin barrels, column wheel, and a vertical clutch. It's got every technical refinement you could possibly want, right down to a high degree of shock resistance and amagnetic resistance, thanks to the Omega SI14 silicon hairspring. So that is a movement that gives you everything you would want in terms of mechanical refinement and durability. Now, speaking of durability, this is another brand that's an independent, so we're going small again, and we're going outside the realm of Germany and Switzerland, back to merry old England, London specifically, and Bremont. Now, this is an interesting watch because it is the G4 Hercules, a watch launched for 2019. This is the 300-piece stainless steel limited edition. It is dedicated to Howard Hughes' famous H4 Hercules flying boat. Now, the flying boat, distinct from a seaplane, has a ship-type hull, so it doesn't sit on floats, but it rests in the water, and the fuselage is itself the hull that creates the displacement and the flotation. So that flying boat, built mostly of birch, but known derisively as the Spruce Goose, flew in November of 1947, sort of told you so by Howard Hughes, just to prove that it worked, also to get Congress off his back, as defense money had been used to build it. Well, this watch was built from parts of that flying boat. At the time, the world's largest plane, and right up into the 1990s, actually possibly right up into the 2000s, the longest wingspan, over 300 feet. The H4 Hercules was simply shocking, awe-inspiring, above scale. And it survives in Oregon in an aviation museum. You can wear a small piece of it on your wrist, as the birch from the original hull was partially removed for restoration for its new museum home, and parts of the discards were used to create the rotor on this BWC2 Bremont exclusive caliber. As you can see, it's basically a Le Jeu Perret automatic adaptation of a 6497 gear train. The movement features a 50-hour power reserve, features a second time zone, independently settable in 24-hour format, so you have that GMT functionality, 2 time zones. There's also a date with a quick set, and as you can see, the dial is handsome, with applique numerals and a lovely dished 24-hour scale outboard. It's a stainless steel case, 43 millimeters, and as I mentioned, there is carbon diffusion as well as plasma arcing used to harden this steel. So on its surface, it is very, very scratch and scuff resilient. You can also see there's a DLC coating on the mid case to create a tonal contrast as well as provide more scratch resistance. Now, another interesting thing about this watch is that when you buy it, you also get a piece of the aileron controls of the so-called Spruce Goose. That is not part of the watch, but it is included in the boxed set along with an ISO 3159 certificate. So while this watch is not a Swiss certified chronometer, since it was made in England and the movement was made in England, it does feature an ISO 3159 certificate, and that 3159 is the technical international standard for chronometers. So that's what the COSC uses, and this watch meets it, albeit adjusted and delivered from England. Throw it on the wrist, it's a good looking watch. The strap is made of vintage leather. It looks and feels the part. The watch is large at 43, but it doesn't feel terribly massive. It's easy to wear from lug to lug. The triptych case, which basically separates the case back, the mid case, and the actual lug structure, means that the vessel holding the dial and the movement is substantially smaller than it would otherwise be, making this watch an easy fit on a small wrist. I like it a lot. I think Bremont has been sort of talked down by the watch collector community. I think it's due for a rebound. Now, quickly talking about luxury sports watches, let's talk about 2 in bold gold. A watch that came out back in the mid-2000s and a watch that came out this year. I'm bringing back the Patek Philippe 5168G010. It was featured on my last show on Wednesday. I'm bringing it back because I love it, and I still have it around to shoot a shorter video. So here it is, 42.2 millimeters and only 8.25 millimeters thick, with that beautifully hand-finished caliber 325 or 324 SC inside. Accuracy, again, -3 plus 2 seconds per day, and still 120 meters water resistant. It features a dial with a geosphere cut and olive drab green matching on the strap. You can see both of them look a little bit like the pomegranate scoring of a grenade. So this is in some ways the white gold grenade from Patek Philippe, and like a grenade, it is explosive. It had an incredible impact at Basel, and I think it's one of my favorite modern Pateks, one of the few that I would wear myself. Now here we go. Richard Mille RM005, one of the early RM005s that was rated at 100 meters water resistant rather than the later 50 and 30 of other RM watches, including the RM10s. Here you can see the watch nicely executed with a sapphire over the DLC-coated movement itself, the movement made of grade 5 titanium, the sapphire bearing the numerals, and then you can see outboard there's a carbon fiber flange with the lume dots, and that means you have a combination of titanium, sapphire, rubber, and of course, gold in this watch. Now you can see the tonneau-shaped case. Here it's more compact than the RM10. It's 38 millimeters wide by 45 millimeters lug to lug, so with the curvature or camber of the case back, this one wears quite easily. As you can see, the strap is vented, so you can really wear this in hot weather and enjoy it without any sort of reservations about the durability limits or sweat susceptibility of your watch. There is none here. The movement, as you can see, is based on a Vacheron 4000, but it's highly modified. Manual wind if you wish, 55-hour power reserve, automatic wound, by manner of course. There's a variable inertia system with those two white gold masses able to move in and out, changing the moment of inertia of the rotor to make it more or less vigorous to a winder. 5-position adjusted like a chronometer with shock absorbers at the corners. These 4 mounting points feature little rubber donuts, so it's a highly shock-resistant movement made more so by the light mass of the titanium bridges and plates, and then it's free-sprung for additional shock resistance. And of course, for precise setting, there's a hacking seconds function. Throw it on the wrist, real easy to wear, a wonderfully compact and comfortable watch. I'm not necessarily an RM true believer, but I'm a believer in the comfort of this basic shape. So I don't necessarily love the way they look because they're a bit outlandish for me, but in terms of comfort, no one does it better. A few things to think about before we leave. A couple of monster watches that I've showcased today. But I'd have to say, this is, as I often like to say, a timepiece that is small of stature, but has serious gravitas and presence. 37 millimeters, the Lange Sohne Langematik, big date, alpha hands. This is an earlier tritium dial version, a model that was made from 97 to 2007. You'd see caliber L921 on the case back, as beautifully finished as the L51 from before, but more intricate. It features a double gold rotor, as the automatic winding system features a 21 karat gold rotor, and then the mass itself is made of platinum and fixed by fire-blued screws. It doesn't get much better than that. 37 millimeters, anyone can wear this watch, and of course, as a Lange, it features white gold hands and indices, plus a dial base that is made of sterling silver. A really special watch. This model right here is just absolutely sensational and viable on any wrist. A handsome white gold watch. This is above category with the feel of a fine column wheel chronograph as I index the grand date. Now, a timepiece that's big, but also remarkably easy to wear. We don't talk too much about the Royal Oak Offshore here on the show, and that's unfortunate because it showcases everything that makes AP different from Vacheron and Patek. There's a sense of joie de vivre and adventure at AP that you just don't see at the other two. They have their moments and they will take chances, but this is not something you will ever see from Patek. Ceramic bezel, forged carbon fiber case, 42 millimeters and 100 meters water resistant with a lacquered mega tapisserie dial and an in-house caliber 3126 base movement. Now I'm going to throw this one on the wrist, and you can see the Bumblebee lives up to its name with a hornback style alligator leather strap and a double contrasting yellow stitch. Because of the combination of ceramic and forged carbon, the watch wears really easily on the wrist. Super light and comfy. It's one of the few 42 millimeter offshores I can recommend for a wrist of my size, even down to about 15 centimeters circumference. You're going to find it fits and sits well, and it's light enough to wear on an even smaller wrist if you don't mind compressing the strap unduly. A really special watch, 50 to 55 hour power reserve, vertical clutch chronograph. It's AP inside, AP on the outside, and again, very different in character from what you get at the other big three Holy Trinity Swiss brands. Now, here's a watch that could only come from one place. In the town of Le Loc, Switzerland, the Ulysse Nardin Stranger. What is it? Well, it is quite simply a music box for your wrist. It plays Strangers in the Night, famously recorded by Frank Sinatra, on the hour. Now that's when it's activated, but it also plays Strangers in the Night on demand. You could see that there is a rotating disc featuring elevated pins that engage each of the individual note strikers. So you wind up hearing it on the hour or on demand, and I'm going to play it on demand right now for your enjoyment. Okay, so this watch is powered by the UN caliber 690 48-hour power reserve automatic winding. There's a manual winding mechanism by rotating the crown counterclockwise to energize the striking barrel. Now, you can see there is a date. There's also a multi-function crown like you'll find on an RM built by Audemars Piguet or an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak contract. So the Royal Oak Concepts system of the multi-function crown, you actually push this crown to change its mode. You don't pull it in or out. Now I can set the time. And you'll note that it hacks the seconds when I'm in time setting mode. Now, when I put it in winding mode, I can wind the base movement and the striking barrel. When I put it in date mode, and I'm not going to activate it right now because it might be in the danger zone, but I can set the date. All of that, and I have the ability to use the crown up at approximately 10 o'clock to turn the system on or off, and then the crown down at, well, I'm going to say it's about 8 o'clock, can be used to activate it on demand. You can see how elevated the hands are. I don't know, they're almost alpha hands, but they're far sharper and more distinct. A great looking watch with hand finishing on the dial side. It's a 99-piece 45mm white gold limited edition from the 2013 model year. And you'll appreciate the fact that the hand finishing on the dial side includes 1, 2, 3, 4 interior angled bevels in the Ulysse Nardin logo and upper bridge for the striking disc. So this is not just a hand-finished watch, but it's hand-finished in ways that are immediately apparent and visible on the wrist, including the fired blue screws used to affix each of the individual note chimes. A sensational watch, and I should say, a rather extravagant watch. Throwing it on the wrist, by the way, you can see the case back with the imagery evoking the music box, which the watch certainly is. You can see it's big, but it'll fit on a 16-centimeter circumference wrist. I wouldn't wear it on a smaller wrist. What a watch, and what a sound. Very few watches can speak for themselves, but this one can. All right. Have I missed anything? Did I run the table? I think I did, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, all prices are in the description below, along with references and names, and we have that tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Email your inquiries to purchase these or any watches you see on our website or on my social media. That's the direct line for you to me and my crew for purchase questions about these watches, also sales and trades. Thank you so much to you, to my crew. Time out, Tim out. Thanks for logging on. Have a great Sunday afternoon.